think this.
Okay. All right. Second line, last words. Amar Rav Yehuda, Amar Shmuel. Ayin Vav, Amid Aleph, third line. Negev Vinistam. If someone has a punctured penis, which henceforth we will refer to as a PP, and it heals, it seals up. So for some reason, you had a whole whatever.
When they make the Hatofas Dambris, where what is the location?
Directly beneath the ridge of the corona.
Okay.
Now, where the orla would have been had it still been there.
Now,
that's just superficial. They do not puncture the penis.
So when I talk about that situation.
No. We're talking about somebody who missed the ear and drove a nail through a penis.
Oh my God.
No, I mean, there's a hole in it.
Nail gun.
Yeah, with a nail gun, whatever it is. A guy has a punctured penis. It's too painful to even think. Oh, yeah, my wife. And people could be born with when my wife was the administrator of the urology department at Downstate, there was a guy there who specialized in pediatric urology. And he did 4 or 5 cosmetic reconstructions on Jewish babies where moilim screwed up. And this was every week. I mean, when you do 1,000 milas, you're going to have 1 or 2 where you screw up. Anyway, so according to Rav Yehuda, if someone has a punctured penis, now this puncture is situated in such a way that it interferes prior to its healing with the ejaculation of semen, if you can imagine the location. Okay, kol sheilu nikre v'nikra. So whenever the guy had an orgasm, the force of the semen passing by this aperture would cause it to reopen. Well, I don't know. I know there are no diagrams in our scroll. So I'm not, but in any event, so imagine you have a hole from the width of, from top to bottom, so it breaks the urethra. So when you have an orgasm, the force of the semen causes this hole that had gabbed over to reopen. Let's imagine it that way. In any case, that guy's puzzled from marriage. On the other hand, if he can ejaculate perfectly fine and it doesn't affect the hole, or I imagine, I didn't see this anywhere, if the hole is in a location where it does not interfere with the movement of semen, then he's kosher, he can marry anybody he wants. Have Rava. So Rava thought this through. So, and he says, Heicha, the question you all asked, where is this hole? Now, here we're going to have a problem of language, okay? Because the language will say above and below. All right, so let me give a little bit of background. Whenever we think of the Torah of a penis, I have been heretofore accustomed to think of the bulbous end of the penis, the whole bulb. But we're going to discover that at least in the next few lines, the word Torah defines the ridge at that goes around where the Torah bulges out from the shaft. And there's like a ridge and then it tapers to the front. Okay, so we're going to repeat using the word Torah to mean the ridge. We're also, even though we're talking about an erect penis, which tends to stick up, we're going to be pretending that it's a dangling penis. So the word above means between, closer to the body, and the word below means closer to the tip. Okay, everybody got that? Have Rava. So Rava is trying to picture this hole that's disturbed by semen. Heicha, where's the hole? If you say that this hole is between the ridge and the tip of the penis, below the atara, afilu nikras nami. So if Rahman al-Islam, the whole thing were cut off, forget a hole. The whole penis was sliced off a centimeter beyond the ridge. So the guy's fine. It's not a problem. Afila nikras nami. We learned this earlier. If the whole tip is cut off, there's no problem. The guy can get married. Ella ba'atara atzma. So he says this hole has to be on toward the bottom of the penis, meaning closer to the urethra, disturbing the urethra in the ridge. Okay? Now we're going to try and justify that. Itmar Nami, somebody else says, Omer Rav Mari ben Bar Mar, Omer Mar Ukva, that Rav Ukva says, Omer Shmuel, in the name of Shmuel, Nikev ba'atara atzma v'nistam. We're talking about a puncture in the atara, meaning in the ridge, and it starts healing, it seals up. Kol, excuse me, Kol she'ilu nikre v'nikra puzzle. If that hole were to open up when he's ejaculating and the semen comes out through the hole rather than through the tip of the penis where the urethra opens to the air, he would not be able to marry a regular Jewish girl. Just parenthetically, he would be able to marry a convert or a freed slave, but he can't marry a regular Jewish girl. Ve'ilav kosher. But if the hole is sufficiently healed that he can ejaculate in the normal manner through the tip of the penis or through whatever's left if it's truncated, then he can marry anybody. Sholach le Rav Berei de Rava le Rav Yosef. So the son of Rava, Rabba, not Rava, goes and asks, this Rava, the son of Rabba, goes and asks Rav Yosef, Lamaditu Rabbeinu, teach us, tell us all about this, Rabbi. Heicha avidnan, what do we do? Now, Reuven comes to his local competent Orthodox rabbi, and he says, Rebbe, I have a hole in my penis. Can I get married next Sunday? Right? So how do we determine whether or not he ejaculates through the tip or he ejaculates through this whole nebuch? So here's what we do. Amalei, Rav Yosef says to him, my sinan nahama chamima desaare. You take freshly baked barley, a roll made out of barley, fresh from the oven while it is still hot. Omanchinan le abe pukre umikre. And you place this hot roll on the questioner's
Don't try this at home.
anus. And that causes it heat. I guess it heats up his prostate and it causes him to ejaculate. Okay, and you watch the semen come out. And okay, so that with another words, and that tells us where it's coming out from.
Not allowed, but because you're doing it for.
Yeah, it's not
However-
shichvazera levatala because you're doing it for a reason. Just as if a man is trying to fertilize his wife, he's allowed to masturbate. But I guess they didn't know about masturbating because they didn't just masturbate; they used the hot roll technique. Okay, so we have full disclosure, it doesn't work. Okay. Amar Abaya. Okay. Now, Atu Kule Alma Yaakov Avinu Have, is everybody like Yaakov Avinu Dixive Koichi Verashis Oni? Is everybody like Yaakov Avinu, who when Reuven was born, the pasuk says, "My strength and the beginning of my power," which means this is the very first time in his entire life that he had an orgasm, and Reuven was the result. Shelo ra keri b'yamav. He never had an ejaculation prior to that intercourse with Leah. So apparently, this is some refutation of the hot roll method. Okay, Ella Omar Abaya, but what Abaya says you do instead is Ma'avirin Kaime Big Day Tzavainin. You wave an itsy bitsy yellow polka dot bikini in front of the guy. And he fantasizes there was a woman not in that bikini. And he ejaculates. Omar Rava, Atu Kule Alma Barzile Hagiladihu. He says, is everybody like this fellow Barzilai the Giladi? Now, Barzilai the Giladi was so easily aroused that every time a pretty girl walked past him, he had an orgasm. So, in other words, the waving the sexy garments in front of the guy won't always be enough. Ella, what you have to do, okay, is v'chazarta b'dishanin me'ikara. No, you go back to the barley bread technique. Okay. Tana Rabbanan. We learned already. Naked puzzle. If you have a puncture in your penis, you can't marry a regular woman, a normal Jewish woman, mipnei shehu shoises, because the semen leaks out of that hole. Stam. But if the hole is sealed up, so the semen comes out the tip like it's supposed to, kosher, he's allowed to get married. Mipnei shehu moilid, because that if he has a normal spurt, and we learned earlier, if it shoots out like an arrow, then it's going to be a virile and will cause the woman to become pregnant. But if he's a dribbler, the woman won't be able to get pregnant. So here, if the hole is sealed up and he can spurt again, he's okay. Because he can spurt and she can get pregnant. And this is in the category of issues, no pun intended, that might be ma'akev now, but you can correct the problem and he'd be able to get married at a later date. So, but it uses the word zehu. So zehu is always a tip-off that there's something either included or excluded. So zehu lama'ute mai. What is the zehu come to exclude? And now we're going to take a side venture into kosher behemoths. This is to exclude lama'ute krum sha'olu machmas maka bereya. When you shecht an animal, you have to take out and inflate the lungs. If the lungs fill up like a balloon, the animal is kosher. But while you're inspecting it, if you look at this blown up lung and there are sirchas on it, lesions that were once holes but are now healed, and there's sort of a scab-like thing covering what once was a hole, the Gemara here says, if there is this lesion and you can flick it off, okay? If there's lama'ute krum sha'olo machmas maka bereya, if there's like a scab on the hole, that would exclude that animal from being kosher. The okay, Vieno krum, and it's not a very effective seal. So what they do is they flick at this little scab-like thing with a fingernail, thumbnail, and if the scab peels off and the lung deflates, then it's not kosher. If the scab does not flake off when you flick it with your thumb, then it is kosher. Now, there's a machlekes between the Machaber and the Ramah with regard to these things. So the word glot means, theoretically, no sirchas whatsoever. In practical terms, glot means bazman hazeh, a couple of sirchas and nishkaferlich. And Beis Yosef, if you look at the labels on the meat, Beis Yosef means no sirchas whatsoever. Okay, so now that you know more about scabs than you ever wanted to know, we'll go weiter. Sholach le Rav Idi Baravin Lavaya, he asks him a shaila. Poor old Yitzchak has this hole in his penis that reopens or that has never closed, and he wants to get married. So what kind of procedure is available to us to cause this hole to go away? Okay, and here the cure is going to be worse than the okay. So Heichi Avdinan, here's what we do. My sinan sa'arta, we take a barley kernel. That's like a seed, and it's about maybe a quarter of an inch long. Okay? Umisortinan le. And we take the pointy end of the barley corn and we scrape it around the edges of this hole until the guy bleeds a little bit. Umaisinan tarva. And then you bring a big ant. You bring animal fat, the shaifinan, and you smear it around over the bleeding wound and over the hole. Omaisinan shumshina garmla. You take a big giant ant. Omav tinan le. And you stick the head of the ant into the hole in the penis, and the ant's mandibles will bite the inside the hole, and the head will get locked in there. And then you opaskinan le reshe, and then you pinch off the animal's body so the head remains inside the hole. Okay,
and my choice either rolls or ants.
No. Rolls are to help you along. Ants are to let you get married. So that means you have to have ants at the chassan. Okay. V'dafka sa'arta. Wait a second. Now the Gemara gives us an eitzah. In order to scratch up the hole and cause it to bleed, you pretty much have to use a barley corn. Aver parza mizrach zarif. But if you use a metal tool, that's no good because it'll tear too much. It'll wound the person. Vahane mili cotton. Now there's a machlokes what this next means. Vahane mili cotton avul gadol mekafule makpil. So what it means is a little one is all you can do, but a big one, the hole won't close up properly. It'll be like a scab that could always reopen. So there's a machlokes whether this means a big hole or a little hole, or it means a young person or an older person. And we'll leave that at that point. Okay. Now, what happens if you're born with more than, like you have like an aperture, a quarter, a centimeters, say, below, towards closer to your body than the tip of your urethra? Okay. Here, okay.
Manufacturer's defect?
Right, a manufacturer's defect. Or the moil did something to cause a defect. Rava bar Rav Huna, hamatil mayim b'shtei mekaymas. If urine exits your body through two holes, one the proper urethral hole and the other an extra hole, okay, puzzle, he cannot marry. And now Rava says the following, and we'll have to figure out what this means in a minute. Omar Rava, les hilchas lo kibra v'lo ka'aba. The halacha does not agree with Rava bar Rav Huna, or with the son, or with the father Rav Huna. So what does all that mean? Bra, it doesn't agree with the son. Hada Amrinin, as we explained a minute ago, that two holes you can't, that you pee through two holes you cannot marry. And here I have to make a new explanation. The Gemara seems to be telling us that a normal man does not have solely a urethra, but he has an additional tube, and urine comes out through the urethra, and semen comes out from the separate tube. Now, the Rishonim all comment that, I go to locker rooms and I never saw anybody with two tubes. So the Rishonim all say we once had two tubes, but nowadays we only have one tube. That's what they say. Okay? So the son, we do not paskin like the son, that if urine comes out from two holes, you cannot marry. It has no bearing, urinating has no bearing on marriage, as long as your seminal tube is intact and semen comes out in spurts from the tip. That's okay. That's where the Abba, the halacha does not follow the father. And now, if you're a sensitive person, please cover your ears. The Omer Rav Huna says, Nashim hamisololis zu b'zu. Women who excite themselves and get themselves off by scissoring their legs together and rubbing their vaginas against each other are no longer qualified. Okay, psulais lekahuna. They are no longer able to marry kahanim. Sid, Mel, check out. Okay, that's what Rav Huna says. But the halacha is not like that. Afilu Rabbi Eliezer the Omer, because even Rabbi Eliezer, who says Pinoi haba al pinua, a single kid boy who fools around with a single girl, shalol l'shem ishus, and they're not doing it to become married. Okay. Zoina, and that makes the woman. We talked about this a week ago, maybe, that technically a woman who has sex doesn't matter willingly, doesn't matter unwillingly with any male other than her truly wedded husband is called a zoina. Ha mile ish. That only applies if she has sex with a male. Okay, Avil Isha, but if a woman figures out a way to have sex with another woman, Pritsusa Ba'alma, that's just unhealthy behavior. She's a prutsa. But that is not an ikuv. So we can be comfortable now. You don't have to check out the women you marry to find out if they ever were with a girl in college. Okay. Now let's talk about these unfortunate individuals with genital flaws. Pitsua Daka Vakrus Shifcha, a man whose penis or his testicles or his penis are damaged or crushed. Mutarin legiyares umishuthreres. They may marry a convert or a freed slave. The Einan Asurin Ella Milavo Bakahal. They are only forbidden from marrying women who are considered part of the congregation, meaning born Jewish, free Jewish women. Okay, Shenemar, as it says in the Pasuk, Lo Yavo Pitzuadaka Vakrus Shifka Bakal Hashem, that a person who's got wounded or crushed testicles or a missing penis may not, or damaged penis may not enter the congregation. Okay. Boy me namer of Sheshes. Now, we just said that a guy with a damaged organ cannot marry anyone but a convert or a slave girl. What happens if the guy's born a Kohen? Kohen's not allowed to marry a convert or a slave girl. Does having crushed testicles mean that he loses his kahuna and he can marry? Or does it mean that doesn't affect his kahuna and he may not marry? That's going to be the question. Boy, mine Rav Sheshes, they asked Rav Sheshes, pursue a Daka Kayan, a Kohen with these issues. Mahu bigiyores umishu chereres. Can he marry one of these girls? Bikadusha say koi the iser. Do we say he still retains all of the kedusha of the kahuna and he's not allowed to marry them, and he can marry no one? Oidilma, or maybe we say lav bikadusha say koi v'shari. Maybe having crushed testicles takes away enough kedusha from said unfortunate Kohen that he could marry a Geyoris, say. So Amar Lahu Reb Sheshes Tinisua, we learned this already. Pitsua Daka Yisroel, a regular non-Kohen Jew, Mutter B'Nisina. He may marry a Nesina. A Nesina is a woman from one of the Canaanite tribes that tried to get out of being destroyed by converting. And we consider that since you converted to save your life, you have an ulterior motive, and her Jewishness is questionable. Okay? The Isal Kedaitach B'Kedusha say koi. If you say, I'm sorry, a person with crushed testicles can also marry a Nesina. So if you say that the Kedushas Yisroel is diminished because he has crushed testicles. Mikre kan lo tin chasen bo. You cannot marry a Nesina. So you see that for Israel, who may marry a Nesina, that there is enough diminishment of the Kedushas Israel that the rule you can't marry them is canceled. Okay, so that would imply that a Kohen also's kedusha is diminished, and he could marry a Georis if he has genital issues. Amar Rava atu hasam mishum kedusha v'lav kedushahu. Are you telling me that the analysis that it is because the kedusha is diminished, that's why you can marry her with crushed testicles? Dilma moilid ben v'azil polach v'avodas kachavim. Maybe the reason you can't marry the Nesina is she comes from a different culture and she's going to have an influence on the family, and your children will wind up becoming non-Jews if you marry a Nesina. Vahani mili vehiyu son of the kachavim. That would only apply to the Nesina before she converts. Ki Megaire, but if she did convert, Mishara Sharu, she could biblically, she converted. And the halacha is if you're suspicious that the person converted for ulterior purposes, you keep an eye on them, and if they comport themselves as Jews, you figure that they were legitimate converts. If it turns out they don't eat kosher, they don't keep Shabbos, you assume the conversion was invalid. But so if these women convert and comport themselves properly, it's on a biblical level, they can marry a Jew. V'rabbanan de gazru bahu. And it's only a takanas rabbanon, a gezeris rabbanon, that they cannot marry anybody. V'chi gazru bahu rabbanon, the rabbis only make the gezerah b'chanach tebei uludai. Only for women, for men who are capable of fathering children, and therefore you have the concern of the children going off the derech. Aval hai, but in this case, where the guy's sufficiently damaged that he can't have children, the lavar olude lo gazru be rabbanan. The rabbis don't make a decree on the Yisrael because he can't have kids anyway. Who cares who he marries? So if that's the argument, then it doesn't affect the Kohen. So we want to argue now, we want to prove up one way or the other, is there really only a gezerah where the ability to father children is involved? Elamiata, if you say that, mamzer debar ulude, what about a mamzer who is capable of fathering children? Nami de isur. He also, the halacha is, may not marry a nesina. V'hotanan, but we learn elsewhere, mamzerim v'nesinim mutarim lovo zebazeh. A mamzer can or must actually marry a mamzeres, and a nasin must marry a nesina or equivalent. Okay, so the reason can't be what'll happen with the next generations, because otherwise you would say a mamzer or a nasin could never marry at all. So that tries to knock out the argument that it's because you can or cannot father. Ella ki gozer rabbanan, when the rabbis made the decree, b'ksherim, they said that a normal, healthy, fully intact male may not marry a nesina. Bipsulim lo gazur rabbanan. But when they made the original gezerah was worded: healthy guys cannot marry a nesina. So somebody with testicular trouble could marry a nesina. So, okay. So, Hadar Omar Rava. Later on, Rava said, Lav milsahi. It's wrong to say that I said before that Rava postulated that only prior to her conversion is there a biblical prohibition. Okay, bihiyusan of the kachavim leslahu chasnus, because prior to marriage, no Jew can marry any non-Jew. There is no rule on a nasan or a nasina. It's a general rule. No Jew may marry a non-Jew. Nisgairu aslahu ha-chasnus. It's only after conversion that Jews and once upon a time non-Jews can consider marrying each other. So since it's biblically forbidden to marry a nasan or a nasuna, and yet a person who has these damaged genitalia, it's clear that we go back to the original reason. The only reason a Jew who is damaged can marry a nesina is because there is a diminution of kedusha. So at this point, we might assume that a kohen with damage could marry a geyores. Okay, Mesiv Rav Yosef. Rav Yosef argues against that. Okay, v'yes chaten shloimai es bas Paro melech Mitzrayim. Shlomo married a princess from Egypt, the daughter of Paro. So here, she's not Jewish, and the word marriage is clearly used in the pasuk. So the Gemara says, no, you don't understand. Gayure Gaira. She agreed to convert prior to the wedding. Okay, so the Gemara says, what good does that do? V'halo kibel gerim, but there was a halacha David HaMelech made a takana that Jews could not, with Judaism, would not accept converts. The theory was when the Jewish people are oppressed and life is miserable, then somebody who becomes Jewish does so for truly spiritual reasons. But when David HaMelech was the most powerful king in the region, and all the kings and the neighboring kings would give him tribute and stuff, people figured there is economic or social benefit to converting to Judaism. So David made a takana, nobody could convert to Judaism. And Shlomo maintained that takana because now he's building the temple and there's this gorgeous temple and everybody wants to come and see the temple. You can't go in unless you're a Tahor Jew. So Shlomo, and you might convert. So Shlomo continued this takana. V'halo kiblu gerim lo b'mei David lo b'mei Shlomo. So it couldn't happen. Midei dehutaima ella the shulchan malachim. So they explain, as I just did, that the rationale for this takana was there would be a societal benefit. You could dine with the king. But here, Bas Paro, she's already married to a bigger king than Shlomo. Her marrying Shlomo is not a social elevation. Ha lo tzrichale. She doesn't need to convert to become a high-class dame. She's already the daughter of a king. So the takana didn't apply to her and she could convert. So just a minute. There's another halachic problem. The tipuk le daha mitzris rishonehi. There's a halachic issue. An Egyptian may convert to Judaism, but the first generation Egyptian cannot marry a regular Jew. And the second generation Egyptian cannot marry a regular Jew. You got to be the third generation already before you can marry a regular Jew. So how could Bas Paro convert and marry Shlomo? That's forbidden. That's a diraisa. That's not a takana. Shlomo can't wiggle out of that by saying that takana doesn't apply to her. So we would say, if you want to say, Hanach Azle La Alma. So maybe the loophole is that in the 1,000 years or so since Yitzias Mitzrayim, the Hittites and the Phoenicians, and in other words, Egypt has been invaded many times. Nobody is left in Egypt who's a pure Egyptian. The current king is a Ptolemaic king who came from outside of Egypt. So the rule doesn't apply to those people. If you want to make that argument, Vahani, Acharine, Ninahu, the people in Egypt are not really Egyptians anymore. Vahatanin, Tanya, we have a brisa that says, Omer Rav Yehuda, Minyamin Ger Mitzri, a Hoyali Chaver Mitalmide Rabbi Akiva. Flash forward several, maybe 800 years, and the time of Rabbi Akiva, which is now already no more second temple, and an Egyptian converts to Judaism and becomes a big Talmid Chacham in the yeshiva, but he says about himself, Omer ani mitzmi rishon, I'm a first generation Egyptian, and I married a non-Jewish convert who became Jewish, which I was allowed. V'nosasi mitzris rishayna. I'm a first. I read that already. And I asi livnei mitzris shniya. So I will make a shidduch with another second generation Egyptian family for my kids. Okay, Kedei Shiye Ben B'nai Rui Levava Kahal, so that my grandchildren will be able to marry regular Jews. So if you want to argue that at Shlomo's time the Egyptians weren't really Egyptians anymore, doesn't work, because 800 years later the Egyptians are still Egyptians. So Omer Rav Papa explains, Anan Mishloimo Leiku V'Nasiv. So do you want to make some kind of a halachic argument where the pasuk clearly says that Shlomo married her? Shlomo lo nasiv midei. Shlomo didn't really marry her at all. She just was a concubine. Okay? V'ksiv Bay, and because it says elsewhere in a pasuk, Min hagoyim asher Omar Hashem al b'nei Yisrael, among the people about whom God says you cannot marry them. Ochein atu es levavechem acharei Elohehem. Because if you marry non-Jewish girls, they're going to influence you, and you're going to wind up going off the derech. Bahem dabach Shlomo liahava. Shlomo, and it uses this beautiful euphemism, Shlomo clung to her out of affection, okay, out of love. But they weren't really married, but because he was so emotionally involved with her, the pasuk uses the word love. Mitoch ahava yisera, ahava, because of this tremendous extra degree of love, he loved her. Maila love akasav keilu nischatem ba. the pasuk uses the word he married her. He's just being nice. Okay. So now we're getting back to, so that we've dispensed with that, and we still have the problem about a non-Kohen marrying an Asina, or a Krushivcha Kohen marrying a Geores, say. Omerle Ravina Ravashi, he asked the following question. Anantanan, didn't we learn in a Mishnah to a daka of a Krushivcha Mutorim Bigiyores Ubishuchreres? A person with genital damage can marry a convert or a freed slave girl. Ha benesina asire. But that Mishnah didn't mention an Asina, so an Asina is still out. Okay, Omerle Ulamitaymech. But if you think of it that way, Amos Sefer, look at the rest of that Mishnah. The Einan Asurin Ella Melavo Bekahal, the women he's not allowed to marry are the women who are part of the regular congregation. Ha b'nesina shari. So since the nesina is not part of the regular congregation, the implication is he could marry her. Ella, so we have, the bottom line is miha leka mishmamine. Since the Mishnah is internally contradictory, and since there's no discussion dragging in brises to clarify or rectify the contradiction, we simply say that we blind by a shaila, and halachically we cannot infer anything from that Mishnah, and therefore there is no, as far as the Gemara at this point chronologically, there is no determination as to whether a Krushivcha Kohen can marry a Georis or not. So if you happen to be in that position, ask your local qualified Orthodox rabbi. Okay. So we've been talking about marriages that are allowed, marriages that are not allowed. We're not going to dig deeper. Okay? Amoni v'amu Moavi Asurin. Convert from Ammon or Moab may not marry a person who's part of the Kahal, the Isurin Isul Olam. And this prohibition is permanent, meaning that 50 generations later, those people have to marry, those descendants of the Moabi would have to only marry converts, freed slaves, etc., or Zeres, whatever. Ava Nikevosehem Mutoros Miyad. But a female Moab, a Moabis, or a female Ammonite may convert and marry the 3 months later.
How timely.
What?
That is a very timely statement.
Yes. Okay. Now, Mitzri va'adomi, a person from Egypt or from Edom, ein an asurin ela ad shlosh daras. It's only the third, until the third generation, then they can marry it. Echad zgarim v'echad nekevos. It doesn't matter if an Egyptian is male or female. The rule applies 3 daras. Okay. Rabbi Shimon matir es hanekevos miyad. Rabbi Shimon says no. An Egyptian girl you can marry immediately. Now, the fact that we didn't mention this with Shlomo is because Rabbi Shimon is a das yachid. So it would not have been the halacha vis-a-vis Shlomo. Okay. Rabbi Shimon matir es nekevos miyad, immediately. Omer Rabbi Shimon kal v'chomer hadvarim. It's a basic kal v'chomer. Ma'im b'makom sha'oiser es hazecharim Yisrael olam. When it comes to the Ammoni and the Moabi, where the prohibition, if it's a male convert, goes on forever. Hetir es anekevas miyad, but the women are fine right away. Makam shelo aser es hazachorim ela ad shlosha druros, where it's a prohibition is only until the third generation in the men. Makam shelo aser es hazachorim ela ad shlosha doros. Ein adin shenatir es haznekevas miyad. Doesn't it make sense that the women should be able to get married immediately? Amr Lo, the other rabbi, said back to him, Im halacha nekabel. If that's really the halacha, meaning if that's a Messiah, okay, we have no choice. We'll accept it. Ve'im lidin yesh tshuva. But if you came up with this kalva chomer, we could argue with it. Amr lahem loki. There is no real refutation to my kal v'chomer v'halacha ani omer. And furthermore, I got this from my Rebbe, who got it from his Rebbe, and I contend that's the rule. Okay, so minahani mili. How do we know that this business of the way this Mishnah described it applies? Okay, how do we know that Ruth, for example, could marry Boaz? That's the question. And we're going to go back, and we're going to talk about an historic incident where David, while he was still a kid, young man, borrowed the king's armor and went and fought Goliath. Right? That's what's going on here. Omer Reb Yochanan, the Omer Crow, we have a dialogue in Psukim. The Kiras Shaul as David Yaitse Likras Haplishti. When Shaul saw David marching out in Shaul's armor to go fight Goliath, Amar al Avner Sar Hatzavah, he turned to Abner, the general of the army. Ben Mizeh Hanar Avner. Who is this kid? Whose son is this young man, Avner? So Avner says, V'yomer Avner. Avner replies, Chai nafshecha hamelech, by the king's own life. Im yadati, I have no idea. Okay? Now, the Gemara interrupts the dialogue. V'lo yodale, didn't Shaul know who David was? David was singing psalms to him every night so the king could fall asleep. They were close buddies. V'haksiv ve'ehav vehu miyod yehi lo noise kelim. The pasuk actually says Shaul loved David so much that he gave him his own armor to go and fight in. So how could he say that? Who is he? Ella a'avuha kamashil. He was asking, literally, he was asking who his father was. And again, we ask, V'aviv lo yadale, didn't he know who his father was? V'haksiv, the pasuk says, V'ha'ish b'mei Shaul zoken bo ka'anashim. In the time of Shaul, David's father was already a very old man, and he went around with a large retinue. V'omer Rav Isema Rebbe Ava, somebody, Rav or Rav Ava said, Zeh Ishai Avid David. This old man that pasuk is referring to is David's father Yishai. V'yatza Lusa, and he walked around, coming in and going out with a huge crowd. So we cannot mean David saying, who is this kid? Okay, who is his father? He has to be asking a deeper question. And Hachi Kamar, this is the deeper question. Zil Shal, go and check out David's Yichus. Im peretz asi I mizerach asi. Everybody knows David is from Yehuda.
Right.
Yehuda had two sons, and one of them would be the line of Malchus, and the other would not. So Shaul is really saying, what kind of a Yehudi is this David? Is he a threat to me? Okay, V'hamelech poretz lasos derech, because a king can. Okay, I'm sorry. The imi peretz asi malkahave. If he comes from Peretz, he could wind up becoming the king. He could take over my job. Shahamelech poretz lasos derech, because the king can march through and break down what he likes. So the name Peretz means that's the kingly family. The ein machin biyado, nobody can challenge him. The imi zerech asi, but if he's only from Zerach, chashiva ba'al mahave. So he'll become famous. He'll kill Goliath. Everybody will wave signs what a hero David is, but he won't be a threat. Okay? And Omer le Shaul ole. So why did Shaul tell Avner check him out? Tichsiv v'yilbe Shaul es David midav. I'm sorry. That Shaul put his own armor on David. Kemidaso. So we make a pun on the word midav. Kemidaso, they fit perfectly. It was like a simon that he should be the king. Bishaul mishichmo umayla gavoa mikol ha'am. That Shaul had a bigger head than anybody else alive. Literally, from the shoulders up, he was humongous. So they took this humongous helmet and they stuck it on little David's head, and it fit perfectly. So that's clearly a simon that he's going to become king. So now we're going to introduce a third person to the conversation who's going to be midgeting between Shaul and Avner. Omer lo Doeg ha'adomi, Doeg the Edomite, interrupted the conversation. And he said, Ad sha'ata mashil alav im hagun hu lamalchus im lav. Before you go and ask, can this guy David become king or not? You got to ask a more basic question. Shoel alav imrui lavo b'kahalim lav. Is he even a legitimate Jew? Can he marry? Can he make unrestricted marriages? Because we know a dirty little secret about his great grandmother. My timer, what's the rationale? The Casa Merus Hamoavia. Hey, we has a dirty little secret. Rus is his great grandmother, and she's from Moab. And a Moabite cannot marry any Jew ever. And David couldn't be king. He can't even get married. So Amar le Avner. So Avner turns to Doeg and says, no, that's been paskined already. Tanina, we have a brisa that says Ammoni velo Ammonis. Only a male Moabite has this pagam. And Ammonis can marry anybody. You can marry immediately 3 months to make sure she's not pregnant. Moavi velo Moavi, same rule, Moavian and Moavis. So Ella miata mamzer lo mimzeres. So Doag replies, just a minute. If you're going to say that a Moabite can marry a regular Jew and her children can marry anybody you want, there's no pagam. Are you going to say a female mamzer is not allowed to marry, but is allowed, but a male isn't? Elamiata mamzer below mamzeres? If you're making a distinction between males and females, do we apply that universally to people who are not in the kahal? and we let mamzeres marry anybody they want. Mamzer kasiv. Avner says back, mamzer. The word mamzer is a contraction. Mumzar. There's a strange defect, and it applies to bub, meaning the znus of the parents, and it applies universally to men and women. So Doag says mitzri velo mitzris. Doag keeps persisting. A male Egyptian, but not a female Egyptian. I read about Rabbi Eliezer's psak. And Avner replaced Shani Hacha. That's different. The Meforesh time of the crow, because the pasuk actually explains why males of Moab and Ammon are not allowed to become Jewish, but females can. The pasuk says, "Davar asher lo kidnu eschem belechem u'b'mayim." The reason they are barred from regular conversions and marriages is because historically they treated the Jews badly when they were passing through to go to Israel. They refused to sell them bread and water. V'darcha shel ish lekadem v'lo darcha shel isha lekadem. And it was the men that went out and refused. The women stayed home. Okay, so Doag still is not happy. Doag says, Hayalahem lakadem, when they go, they should have brought them for anashim likras anashim v'nashim likras nashim. The men should have taken bread and given it to the men, and the women should have taken water or bread and given it to the Jewish women. So Ishtik, Avner didn't have an answer to this. Miyad, immediately, that's when Shaul said, Omer Hamelech Shaul Asabin Mizeh Ha'alem. Go and see whose son this guy really is. And the word Halem here means young person, but it also means hidden or secret. Hassam, earlier the pasuk called David Kari le Na'ar, called him a young man. Hacha Kari le Elem, here it calls him a young person, but it has this double meaning of secret. Hachi Ka'amalei, here's what Saul was really saying. Halacha nis alma mimach. You're not sure what the halacha is. You're back and forth with Doeg. Showed that you didn't really know what the halacha is. Say shol bebeis medrash. Go and ask the rabbis what the halacha is. Shaul, so Avner went and asked. Amrule amoni velo almonis. The prohibition is only on the males, not on the females. Moavi velo moavis. The males, not the females. So with the turn, we'll just do the top line. Akshe lahu Doeg kol hani kushoisa. So Doeg followed Avner into the base medrash, and he also asked questions. And he did, but what about how could it be different rules for Gypsies? And they're the same challenges he gave to Avner. The Ishtaku, they didn't answer. Okay, and if you want to find out what the final result is, tune in tomorrow.
All right.
Okay, I'll leave this here. Bob,
Yes.
take your telly.
Thank you very much.
Take the towel. Take the towel.
Take my what?
Take your towel.
Take my towels too. Bye, Javi.
Have a good day. Thank you.
Too. Thank you.